Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a realm where reality intertwines with the inexplicable, where the boundaries of reason dissolve into the shadows of uncertainty. Welcome to the political twilight zone. I am your guide through this enigmatic labyrinth, where politics and power take on life of their own. In this dimension, the threads of truth weave a tapestry of intrigue, challenging our perception of the world we thought we knew. In this world, nothing is as it seems, and the truth lies buried beneath layers of deceit. Prepare to venture where reason meets the unexplained, and where the unexplained might just be the ultimate.
Well, hello, everybody. I hope you all had a good, prosperous, and overfed Thanksgiving. So, as we're all sitting around on our couches, wondering what is left over in the refrigerator and when can we eat it, I thought we'd talk a little bit this week about a couple of things that, we don't have to talk about exactly what's happening in the news precisely, but there were a couple of interesting things to just chew on a little bit during the holidays. I'm not suggesting that they're fun, but they're something we could think about. The Common Sense Institute here in Colorado did a study about the cost of administration in the public school districts and tried to examine the various metrics in there between student enrollment, how much is spent on students, how much of budget goes to teaching, how much of it goes to administration, who knows how much of it goes to some of these other things. And it was quite illuminating. It's not particularly surprising, but the amount is surprising. It's a concerning trend. The student enrollment has stagnated in the state of Colorado, and in many of you other states it has as well. And it's even declined in many places. What the Common Sense Institute here in Colorado found through their study was this shift in declining student population versus budget and allocation of the budget just doesn't square itself up. If you look in Colorado between 2019 and 2023, the public and school enrollment dropped by 3%. Some districts more than that. That's about 30,000 fewer students in the state. However, over the same period, administrative staffing increased by 19%. So you have a 3% drop in students that ostensibly the system is supposed to be servicing, but you have a 19% increase in administrators. That's interesting. Of that budget, by the way, not only have all these administrators coming up, where do you think it's coming out of the budget? Well, several places, but one place that's interesting if you're a teacher, it might be nice to know. And this is a statewide thing. Each district varies, but none of them are going to be a whole lot better than this, I don't believe. A few, maybe. Anyway, teacher salaries as a share of total educational spending fell from 30.2% of the budget in 2013 to 25.3% in 2023. That's a pretty big decline in your budget priority. I mean, you're growing administrators like weeds in a rainy season, and the teachers' salaries in comparison are not going up as fast as you're growing your administrative overload, I guess I could call it. Many people have thought this, but this is really showing it. So in salary, between 2013 and 2023, in 10 years, the total percentage of the budgets of school districts in this study for paying teachers dropped by right around 5%. Think about that the next time you're being told that you need to pony up some more money for property taxes or something for teacher salaries, because that's not where they're going apparently. The administrative costs, however, rose by 65% during this last decade. The amount of money spent on classroom-specific expenditures, they grew at a much slower pace. There's some problems here. Now, to be fair, federal and state mandates have caused a really large regulatory burden on school districts. They have to do all sorts of reporting, compliance, and management about all sorts of things that don't necessarily have anything to do with your child being able to read or calculate or understand concepts. They have other functions, as we know. The other thing that's costing a lot of money is this desire to throw technology into the classrooms, which in many instances, the rise of this technology has not been equated with the rise in the quality of the educational output. In other words, if you get somebody an iPad, it doesn't make them smarter. It doesn't make them learn any faster. It doesn't make them more motivated. It has really almost nothing to do with teaching. It might seem easier for some reason. I guess lugging an iPad back and forth or some tablet to school is easier than a big book bag, but it's expensive. They have a tendency to have a high replacement cost, and there's never been any real study that it's improved teaching, or certainly improved the retention of students of the information that they're getting. But we just keep pushing it. You folks will remember that this has been going on for a while. I mean, we started this probably, I see the biggest push like the late 90s, early 2000s, where the idea was we need to get some computers in the classrooms. And everybody started pushing technology, which is always expensive. And usually by the time that you get around to buying it through the government, it's obsolete. So you're buying a bunch of expensive equipment that you haven't really done a very good job in most cases figuring out exactly what it is you need. And by the time you get them integrated into the system, they're more or less obsolete. The government has a tremendous ability to buy things that no one else wants or is too complicated. This whole system, I could name 2 or 3 systems where they've decided on certain operating systems or communication types, sort of like we think of Zoom and things, that are needlessly clunky, expensive, and not the one that most people use. Government seems to adopt these things. It's like that somehow attracts them to it. That, oh, well, this is expensive. Doesn't seem to work very well. We need one of those. I mean, it sounds silly that people think that way. I don't have to think that way. It's something that occurs during the allocation process. And during the allocation process, they get these crazy ideas that certain vendors, and we can guess why in some instances, are just better. Not really because of their product, but some other reason. Better presentation, a nicer cup of coffee. I don't know what it is. But it's a very strange thing to watch, and it affects everything. And, of course, the schools are eating up a ton of money. If you want to look at your property tax bill, if you're listening to a state that doesn't have the same kind of tax structure as Colorado or many others, it still comes out. You're still paying for the public schools. And you're paying a lot more than you think. If you were to look at those little percentage wheels that they show you about how much of the pie is being consumed by something, public school education, especially in Colorado, for instance, is consuming a huge amount of property taxes. And some other things that get baked into it as well. Tabor discounts, like they get to keep Tabor money, new bonds, the cost of that. I mean, it just is soaring in many instances. And the technology that they're buying, get back to that for a minute, doesn't seem to be helping that much, and it requires new people, right? You can't put computers in the classroom without having an administration that is a subsecretary for the computerization of the classrooms. That has to happen, doesn't it? So when you do this, you create a whole new administrative section over that, because that's their job now. I mean, you have administrators in charge of buying textbooks and all that kind of stuff. Well, you certainly wouldn't want to pass up the opportunity to have an administrator who is involved in supervising technology in the classrooms. And, of course, that's a very big job. It's very busy. They'll need an assistant. That assistant probably needs an assistant. And before we know it, there's a whole staff working on this. And it didn't even appear in the system, a few years before. And luckily, they're able to not produce as much in the way of test scores because of that, too. That's another sport altogether, another thought together. There's also a whole lot of new programs that come along in schools, to be fair, and these are part of that government mandate. The schools are in all sorts of things that many of you out there didn't think was the job of your local school district or your elementary school or high school, middle school, whatever, to be messing around in. But they're getting these mandates, and this is all part of this idea from many that the government should raise the children, and the government should act within the school system, since it has control of the kids over that time, in what we call local parentis, right, as though they were the parent. And so that we've mandated all these things. We have mental health counseling, special education, all sorts of counseling and programs in there that it's hard to figure out what their return on is. Some of them are probably necessary, but are they necessary at the amounts that we're using them for? Don't know. Okay, we're back. Here we are, all sitting around, still digesting our Thursday meal, I'm sure. Yeah, how many of you went out, by the way, to Freaky Friday, Black Friday, whatever it is they're calling it now? Those are some very brave people that do that. I can't do it. I can only be bumped into so many times. You know, there was where did I see it? I think I saw it on the New York Post. They're apparently at Costco. Some of you have a Costco. We here, where I'm at, we're supposed to get a Costco, but then they decided not to come here. And I'm very suspicious it has something to do with the way that the whole thing was presented to them from the planning department of our local city, who has a way of trying to extract money out of everything until there's no money left in it. So maybe they just decided to pass. Who knows? Anyway, so there was this scene where this larger gentleman was pushing a cart. And, I mean, there's carts all over the place in this picture. And he's pushing it, and then another woman is trying to push through these carts. And they come head to head, sort of a sumo wrestler kind of thing. Then he starts pushing and pushes her out of the way and tells her that this is something you're going to lose, like they're playing the Super Bowl or something. And that's the kind of attitude that some people have out there, real gentlemanly. All right, let's get. Speaking of witches, this annoying stuff is. I'm looking at a note I have here from Friday. I came in on Friday working, and there were a lot of people in the building. But I had some mail coming, and of course I had a FedEx package coming. That's just how that goes, So I thought I'm going to stay here and make sure we get it. And I looked at the tracking on the way. So then I'm sitting around here working and doing things and kind of watching the door because I'd let the rest of the staff go because it was, Friday after Thanksgiving. And nothing ever showed up. And I looked at the time window that they said that it was going to come, and it just didn't see anything. So then I went back to the internet and looked at the tracking, and I saw a picture of the door across the hall from me and saying that undeliverable. Well, yeah, those guys were closed. And I understand that's a little confusing, that sometimes these buildings have a number and there's a number of different offices around and this and that. But to have taken the picture of the office across the hall from me, you would have had to be standing next to a big window with my name on it and a sign on the side of the wall with my name on it. I'm going to assume this package that was coming has my name on it. I don't know what happened there. I had to vent that. Just every so often, it's like, what's going on here? Here we go. Anyway, something that it's both interesting and troubling in a sense. What's going on with our election day vote counting? And how's that affecting the House of Representatives? Remember, we keep talking, we took the House, the Senate, the presidency. The House is pretty thin, my friends, and especially with the president pulling some House members out for, various positions. So I thought we'd look into that, and it's a pretty pathetic situation. Let's see, at the close of business day, I think Friday, the AP was saying that the Republicans were holding 219 seats. Democrats had 213. Now, there were 3 races that were still undecided. Remember, you need 218 to have the majority and hold the House. That's the magic number. So there are 219 with 3 races to be undecided. We're still undecided. Now, I might point out, in case we've forgotten, that Election Day, isn't that a funny thing to say, Election Day, like it just takes a day anymore, was 3 weeks ago. These places haven't managed to get their votes counted yet. Pretty much every third world nation that runs a halfway decent election seems to get it done in a day or so. Not us. Why is that? What's become of us unable to count ballots? Well, there's no surprise. 2 of these are in California. And these are very, very close races, right? And guess how they go? Let's see. California's 13th district, Republican John Duarte, led Democrat Adam Gray by 207 votes with 98% of the ballots counted. Then, magically, an additional 1% of votes appeared from somewhere and it flipped the lead to the Democrat by 182 votes. That's after 22, 23 days. You have to wonder, where were these ballots hiding? Yeah, isn't it always the case how that happens? Very interesting. I'm sure it's just a coincidence. California's 45th district. Democrat Derek Tran has a slim 613 vote lead over GOP Rep. Michael Steele. So that would be flipping a seat, but it doesn't look like we're going to survive that. Because I have yet to see a situation where the Democrat was ahead and somehow they found votes and the Republican managed to win the election. You know, it's a very rare breed out there to find an election result like that, isn't it? Very rare indeed. Now, Iowa's 1st district is the third one that's still undecided. This is the Republican rep there is Marionette Miller Meeks. And at this point, she was edging out the Democrat by 800 votes. Now, if that holds, and of course 800 votes is nothing. They could be found at any moment, floating in a river, in the trunk of a car, maybe underneath a desk. Who knows where these votes might be? And they will surprisingly be probably more Democrats. I don't want to throw anything on the election here, but it just seems to be a trend. But let's assume that these races go like they're headed. That means that Republicans would have a majority of 220 to 215. Once again, 218 is the magic number. So, 220, that's a pretty skinny margin, isn't it? Now, what do you think about that? And here's some more turbulence about that. Now, we all know Matt Gaetz decided to pull out for the U.S. Attorney General for various reasons. Race, and Pam Bondi's been put back in, or rather put in by President Trump. Now, he also decided not to go back to his congressional seat. Now, I think he won his congressional seat in the election by like 66%. But he's decided not to take office. So that seat is, how we say, open. So we have that one going on. Now, Mike Waltz of Florida, also in the House, is set to depart on January 20th, when the president gets sworn in, to become President Trump's national security advisor. And these resignations have triggered special elections. There's a primary on January 28th and a general election on April 1st. Because both of these are in Florida. And that's interesting. Remember, people always get confused. I get confused about this. How is it that if there's a vacancy, the governor can appoint a senator to fill out the term, but not a representative? Ding, 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 ding. I don't have any Jeopardy music. But the reason being, originally, and I still think this is the better way to do it, the states, meaning the legislatures of the states, sent a senator. All right? The legislators voted either, all of them are two houses except for, of course, Nebraska, which is unicameral, voted to send someone as a senator. Now, that was changed because it was too much trouble and it was taking way too long to fill these vacancies. So that was changed to where the governor could appoint someone. I still think that's a bad idea. Nevertheless, really, because as we know, modern guys know a lot more than our framers did. I've noticed this because, they have televisions and iPhones and all this kind of stuff, so they must be smarter, right? Yeah, something tells me that's not true. Anyway, so that's what changed that. So when there's a vacancy in the House, because the House is the people's house, and it is not able to be appointed when there's a vacancy by the governor. So they have to hold a election, a primary, and then a special election to fill the seat. And we'll get into where there's one state here that's pretty interesting. We'll see how that goes because it gets set by their governor. So right now the vacancies will shrink the conference to 218 seats. Now, if you throw in Elise Stefanik, who's from New York, who's the choice for the United Nations ambassador, and you assume she's getting through this Senate confirmation pretty quickly. Let's imagine she gets through it the next day after everybody's getting in on January 21. That would reduce the GOP seats to 217 with these vacancies. Doesn't mean that they don't still hold it. They still have the majority of the members, but they don't have the majority of the seats while these are vacant. So, what happens there? Well, in New York, and of course, all of you are familiar with Governor Kathy Hochul, who is, of course, a genius. She's just sort of a young Nancy Pelosi in training with half the IQ. But why should she hurry the process? Because if someone has a special election and it's in Stefanik's district and there's a good chance a Republican might win, that would mean that they get less of a skinny margin, a little bit larger margin. So it's not in Democrat Kathy Hochul's interest. All right, folks, thanks for sticking around. And, of course, as we come out of the bottom of the hour here, I was still going on in the last segment about this mess that we're going to have in the House of Representatives, where the margin is so thin of control for the Republicans. And there are 3 races that will have to be decided. We think they know how they're going to be decided, so we factored that in. But there's also going to be empty seats, right? Matt Gaetz' seat's going to be empty. Mike Walls' seat's going to be empty. Elise Stefanik's seat is going to be empty when she gets confirmed. So what happens with those? Well, they have to be special elections, like we said. And now Elise Stefanik, as we mentioned in the last segment, is from New York. And, of course, New York has a genius system of government there, as you can tell from looking at how wonderful everything has turned out. And so it's not in the interest of the Democrats in New York, who seem to be in control of everything, to get that seat filled very fast. Because while it's not filled, it continues to keep a very small margin in this race. Because at that point, with those empty seats, with the ones that were still being counted to go the way we think they are, that means the GOP would have 217. And now I know I said 218 is the magic number, but in this situation they still hold control because they have a number that exceeds the Democrats. They don't have the majority of the seats. They have a majority of the representatives right now. And so that can change. So it's not exactly, and I think that actually under New York law, the special election for Stefanik's seat, the latest possible date to have that is April 22nd. It's like 90 days out. What makes me think that that's what's going to happen? She's going to try and hold that seat open as long as she can. So between Inauguration Day and, let's say, the 1st of April, Republican House must operate with 217 seats and 3 vacancies. If all 215 Democrats remain united, Republicans must achieve unanimous votes to pass legislation. Pretty precarious balance. Means that any absence, a missed flight, a bout of the flu, could derail major legislative efforts. However, another thing to consider is that any single Republican could leverage their vote to extract concessions, right? That might turn routine decisions into high-stakes negotiations. Let's say, you're a representative from someplace, and, you'd like to say, hey, I'd love to vote for this legislation, but I'm a little wavering on it. And I was hoping you could, there's a highway I'd like to have built in my district, and strangely enough, named after me, the John D. Windbag highway system. And if that funding could get attached and go through, I think I might feel better about the bill and maybe vote for it. Yeah, who doesn't think that's going to happen? In 2017, we've seen this kind of thing before. When Jeff Sessions left his Alabama seat to become Attorney General, the GOP nominated Roy Moore, who had sort of a controversial past, if we may remember that. And so we got a Democratic victory. in traditionally would have been a Republican stronghold. So this can go a lot of different ways depending on who these candidates turn out to be. There's no given here. And a mistake in these 3 open seats could change a lot of things. Could change everything. And House Speaker Mike Johnson, he seems like a nice guy. Like Tom Massey from Kentucky, and of course Marjorie Taylor Greene. I've not been very happy with him. So you get a few dissenting votes, combine that with some of the vacancies, his speakership could be in jeopardy, right? That would leave the House leaderless and Trump's America First agenda adrift. Can you imagine what would happen again if we tried to choose another speaker? So that's hanging out there. But that's not the worst of the bunch. So I was looking through this stuff. There's the Republican National Senatorial Committee, that's in charge of trying to get senators elected. They did a decent job this time. However, the National Republican Congressional Committee is kind of part of the problem. They had some favorable conditions, and they just didn't put the money in the right places and do some of the right things. And so now we have a pretty fragile majority. So I'm afraid that the National Republican Congressional Committee is not on my, I'm knocking things around, not high on my list of successful entities. So that's what's going on. And you can see that it's so close. And it could flip still. Democrats could get it. We don't think so. But there's a lot of things we didn't think would happen that could happen. So we've got to see here what happens with these elections. I kind of wonder if we shouldn't hold at least one of these 2 seats that we're pulling out, Walz or Stefanik, leave them in there until we have the results of the Florida election for Matt Gaetz' seat. I don't know. Now we can't really do that because if you wait too long, then you end up with just a vacant seat until the next election, and so that's a bunch of trouble too. So we just have to manage this. I keep saying we, but I mean, Republicans have to manage this. And they haven't so far managed anything particularly well, so the House has always been a problem, so we shall see. And of course there's going to be a leadership battle in the Senate since McConnell has decided to go back in his shell and leave it to someone else. There's going to be 2 or 3 people out there that are jockeying for it, and we already know who's won that battle is Thune. But the people that didn't win it, I mean, are their necks going to be, bent out of shape? Yeah, we'll see on that one too. So everything is not as hunky-dory as it feels like. And of course, the reason it's not as hunky-dory as it should seem is because Republicans could never seem to get along. Democrats are like locked together. It always surprises me to say that because traditionally, I know they've said this many times, and you guys know this too, the Democrat Party up until, the 90s, really, was split many different ways, sort of like the Republicans are splitting them now. A bunch of different interest groups, this, that, and the other thing. I mean, we have Will Rogers' famous quote. He said, "I don't belong to an organized political party. I'm a Democrat." But since, 95 or so, the 96 election, Democrats have just been pulled together. Now, it's just like watching the mainstream news. There is a message, a way of speaking about things, a way of doing things, and that's it. And every single person in government, particularly in Washington government, who's a Democrat, not only does the same things that they're supposed to, they say the same things. It's a little eerie. But that helps give them clout, right? On the other hand, Republicans can always find a problem with each other because they apparently don't like to be in power and would prefer to be squabbling and lose the gavel out of the House here pretty soon if they're not careful. We got to watch that. If the House were to flip to Democrats, what do you think would happen? Do you think much of this MAGA agenda is going to get through? I don't think so. And you know what else I think will happen? Be lucky if they don't impeach the president again. I mean, they seem to like doing that. Now, they can do that again. If they have a majority, everybody votes, in lockstep, they can have some sort of, they haven't done it right the last time, but why try and do it right this time? They can have an impeachment, impeach him again, send the impeachment to the Senate, doesn't go anywhere, ugly, it wastes everybody's time. I don't know if they would do that now since he doesn't have the opportunity to run again, President Trump. I don't know if they're just unhinged, deranged, and angry enough that they would do that just out of spite. Probably. They seem to have not learned any lessons from this lawfare against the president. I mean, if you look at each indictment of President Trump over the last year, 14 months, it's a long time, his popularity has actually gone up. It's helped his polling because they're so ridiculous that you don't have to be a legal scholar to see that they're just baloney. And not even good baloney. Sort of like generic baloney. And people don't like it. They start to feel like we're living in a banana republic, as we like to say. I don't think it's a banana republic. I think it's sort of like, the Soviet Union. Where, you had show trials, and if you didn't have enough support in the government, all sorts of things were found out about you that required your prosecution. Once again, you have the Beria thing, show me the man, I'll show you the crime. That's how those guys operated. We were operating like that for a while. Now, Jack Smith, the crazy prosecutor from the Justice Department, if you can use that word, is trying to dismiss the charges against Trump in the federal court in D.C., and he's trying to pull back his appeal for the decision from the judge in Florida on the documents case, stop that appeal process. We need to see how that's done. These things need to be dismissed with prejudice, meaning they can't be refiled. We don't want any of this stuff hanging over Trump's head. Now remember, the state charges in New York, nobody in Washington can really do anything about those because they're state charges. President Trump cannot pardon himself from a state charge. Plus, he has this huge payout to Jean Carroll that he's appealing it because the amount was, some might say ridiculous. But I think that's really too kind of a word. So he's got that. Plus he has, this $400 million some odd change, I can't remember, judgment against him, Letitia James, the New York Attorney General, has against him for all of these supposed, problems with the way he valued things. And then, of course, we end up with the criminal case that's still pending with Judge Merchan, who has taken a weird thing and just vacated the sentencing. Now, what is he going to do with that? Hopefully he can be forced to dismiss it and dismiss it with prejudice. The charges are ridiculously convoluted. The way the jury was allowed to deliberate doesn't seem to have anything to do with our Constitution. And this stuff can't stand up on appeal. It just wouldn't. I mean, even, through New York, it would have a little trouble in appellate courts. And one of the reasons they didn't want to do a sentencing, well, I think they were a little afraid to, but also, President Trump's lawyers cannot appeal that case with these ridiculous charges, jury instructions, and jury behavior. The way the jury was directed. They cannot appeal that until there is an entry of judgment. And the entry of judgment will come at sentencing. So when people say that Trump's a convicted felon, many of you know that from listening to Mark Levin and others, that that's not really true. The conviction is not entered until sentencing. That's the way the law works. So although a jury has found him to be guilty of those charges, everyone might think about that, he's technically not been convicted until sentencing, when that sentencing is, in fact, entered into the record, And it hasn't been done. So is that just going to hang over the everybody's head for I don't know how long? Can't happen that way. I think they'll work that out too. But there is an amazing amount of things out there, and we're all a little too joyous here. I mean, I am joyous about the results of the election, especially since I think that there was funny business, like there is every time, and the margin of victory by President Trump was large enough to overcome that. But remember, all these other smaller races, these House districts and things like that, you got to watch those too. Because when things are this close, just one or two seats, especially in a state like California, where apparently dolphins can vote, I think. I'm not exactly sure. But you can pull up with a dump truck full of ballots as well and deliver those that are supposedly from people that you've collected them from, ballot harvesting. In the state of Colorado, where I'm at, you can bring 10 in, which should not be allowed. In California, there's an unlimited amount that can be brought in. However many you can stuff in the trunk of your Buick, that's how many you can bring in. So it's very troubling. And if you're the Democrats, particularly in this upcoming, and I can't believe we're talking about it already, and we are, the midterm elections in 2026, they're already thinking about that. So we have to really watch the way the voting goes in 2026. And I can't believe I'm saying that right now. It's depressing that we have to have this overarching observation of our system just to get some confidence in it. But there's going to be something weird in 2026, I can tell you already. I don't know what it is. We all know now it takes weeks to count ballots in these congressional districts. Weeks. Now, a lot of these states allow provisional ballots. You come in and say, well, I don't really have the necessary things here today, but I'm going to vote and give you a provisional ballot, and then you can decide what to do with it later on. They got those to go through. They have large windows where votes can show up in the mail. They have all kinds of things like that. So we've become a ridiculous, pathetic example of democracy when it comes to our elections. We don't have election day. We don't even have election week. We sort of have election month if we're lucky. And that never seems to work well for the outside party like the Republicans. And they really are the outside party. When you look at the House, they're very close, rather. So there's going to be a lot of things going on that we're going to have to pay attention to. And it would be nice to have some guidelines, some national guidelines on voting from the federal government. But I'm a little leery about that because the idea was originally that each state, within certain parameters, could decide how to run its elections. And that is still the law of the land. And the elections are usually, supposedly, determined how they're going to be run by the legislatures. More and more, we're seeing bureaucrats make those decisions, the secretaries of state. In my state, we have an interesting one along those lines. Several states do as well, who perhaps in some of those other states overstep the boundaries, or they just tinker with the way they do things, like make it difficult to audit the results of an election, make it difficult to observe what's going on. Remember, this whole thing that we've heard forever, it seems like, that mail-in voting is just as secure as having someone show up with a photo ID, identify themselves, and go in to a little box and vote. Just having a ballot appear out of the air in the mail, maybe in time or maybe a day or two later, who knows, depending on the state, that's just as secure. One that was sent to somebody that you know if they still live there, because a lot of these states will not clean their voter rolls. In other words, if you haven't voted for a few years, it used to be that in many of these states you would have to re-register. They're not doing that. What's the point of that? Why do you want all of these shady ballots going out where certainly a lot of people that have moved are no longer with us, changed addresses, like I said, they've moved, maybe they're out of state, who knows, but the ballots still go out. Who does that really help? If you listen to the arguments for these things, they sound, first of all, childlike, and not an intelligent child. And you think, well, why are they saying these things? It's because it's not the reason. It seems to me that you want to make the vote really easy for people to do and really anonymous, not just the ballot box, but like when the ballot is filled out. See, that was never the idea about a secret ballot. It's not to have you go somewhere else where no one sees it's you, has no identification, and a ballot just, gets thrown out there, and supposedly the person who is registered gets it, fills it out, and sends it in. That's not quite the secret ballot people were thinking of at the time. I think they were thinking that we were not secretive about who was voting. We wanted to make sure who knew who was voting. We're just making sure that you can't tell how people voted, because we know that turns out. And unfortunately, this has been all mixed up in the last few years. There's kind of a war on identifying yourself in this country right now. And it's hard to decide why that is. And when you push the reasons around for why one political party in particular seems to not want anybody to be able to identify themselves to do anything important, certainly not with elections, you have to ask why. Because the reasons that they give just are preposterous. Oh, it suppresses the vote. No, it doesn't. Not a study anywhere that shows it suppresses the vote. We all know the Georgia thing where, they tightened it up a bit, and actually there was more of the vote, particularly with some minorities. So there's nothing that proves that. They just say it. And by saying it over and over again, people just think that it's true. So we're still on the precipice here. Hopefully, the Republicans can hold themselves together and not, get a circular firing squad. That's usually the first thing they do in the House, and either make themselves so damaged they can barely operate, or something happens and they lose their majority, which would be not good. Another thing that can happen is I'd like to call it the effect of the 1994, the Gingrich effect. If many of you go back and look at the 1994 election and when the Republicans took over after a very long time in the desert, there were some problems there. Now, they did work with Clinton, who was quite capable of changing his philosophy at any moment, depending on how the wind blew. But at the same time, they got, let's say, a little cocky and didn't come across very well and couldn't hold on to that majority for very long. Some of you may remember why Gingrich left office, left the speakership. People were not pleased with, the way things ran. It was a little too, I think we got this. Maybe we got this, but let's not count our chickens before they're hatched. Let's not do that now either.
Thanks for listening.
Hey, folks.
Listen, if you'd like to listen to more and you want to maybe perhaps have someone else listen to our podcast, you can do so either by going right to our webpage, politicalviking.com, or therickWagnerShow.com. Both of them take you there. You can get links right directly to our podcast, or you can hear our podcast on Podbean, on iTunes, and Spotify, and a couple others. So you can find us. We appreciate it if you do. And if you've heard the show, you want somebody else to hear it, that's a good way to send it to them. Thanks for listening.